Good afternoon, everyone. This is Corey Kagarais from the State Historic Preservation Office. Thanks for joining us. We're going to test some of the chat functions here, but if you can hear me, why don't you go ahead and please type your name and what community you're from in the chat box in the lower and the left-hand side of your screen. We're going to use, oh, I'm going to figure out how to turn that off so that you're not here. So you're not hearing that all the time. Give me 1 second here, folks. So we're going to use the chat box on the lower left or on the left-hand side of the screen to ask all of our questions and report any issues that you might have during the course of the webinar. We've also got our conference call on, so some folks are listening in through the telephone and listening to the slide and watching the slides on the screen. So as I've asked, and a lot of you have done, please go ahead and you type your name and which community you're from in the box, just so we can make sure that that's all working. So I'm Corey. I'm from I'm the Community Preservation Coordinator for the eastern part of Pennsylvania. Monitoring the chat box is Elizabeth Rera, who is the Chief of the Preservation Services Division. That includes our community planning as well as the National Register program. And here in the room with me is Brian Van Sweden, who's the Community Preservation Coordinator for the central part of the state. Bill, who is our third musketeer in the western part of Pennsylvania, actually couldn't join us this afternoon, but we will make sure that he knows the answers to any questions you folks out west might have during the day. Today we're going to cover the changes to the Certified Local Government Program guidelines and procedures. We're going to talk about the program's benefits, including changes to the grant program and some of our new technical assistance offerings. And then the renewal process for existing CLGs, what that looks like in terms of timing and the steps that you're going to have to work through over the next few months to renew your community's participation. Again, if at any time during the course of this webinar you have a question, go ahead and type it in that chat box, and we're gonna pause at various points throughout the day, throughout this next hour, to answer those questions. So as a recap, this is a webinar for communities that currently participate in the CLG program. I don't know if there are any folks from non-CLG communities that might have gotten wind of the webinar and participating today. What I'd say is we're going to offer future programs like this for communities that are interested in becoming CLGs. So I'd suggest that you make good use of your afternoon and join us at a later date, because we're going to talk about some specific steps and procedures that may not be applicable, that are not going to be applicable to you if you're not already part of the program. And this is a list of all of the communities that currently are CLGs throughout the state. There's 45. So just as a recap, some of you might be new to the specifics or the mechanics of the CLG program. It is a government-to-government program administered by the National Park Service and the State Historic Preservation Office. Every state and territory has a version of the CLG program. At its core, what it means is that a municipality has to meet certain requirements set by the state, and then sign a certification agreement agreeing to continue to meet those requirements with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. CLGs may apply for grants and receive technical assistance. That's one of the benefits for being those are the benefits for being a CLG. And again, in exchange, the CLG maintains a preservation program that meets those the program requirements on an ongoing basis. The program began in 1981. It was authorized by amendments to the National Historic Preservation Act. In Pennsylvania, we began certifying communities to be CLGs starting in 1986. And we've changed the guidelines a few times over the years, but the last time they were kind of substantively changed was in 2009. In Pennsylvania, we manage the sort of day-to-day interactions with our CLGs at the regional level, and Bill, Brian, and I share those responsibilities based on the region where your communities are located. And then Elizabeth is our manager and keeps all of us, the three of us, in line. On the right-hand side of this screen, you'll see a couple of charts just to give you a sense of when communities join the program and where they are in the state regionally. So we had a few in the 1980s. The bulk of the 45 that are currently certified joined in the 1990s or the 2000s. And then we've had 4 join in the last, since 2010. Most of our CLGs are in the eastern region as we define it. I'll show you a map here in a second just to clue you into that. 11 in the central region and 5 out west. That explains probably why I'm talking and Brian gets to sit back and listen today. And for those of you who are probably familiar with this map, but this is when we talk about the different regions in the state, this is the map we're looking at. The eastern region includes Chester County on the southwest up to Wayne County on the northeast. The central part of the state extends out to Center, Fulton, Huntington, Potter, and Clinton counties, and then the western region goes from there through to the western part of to the western border. And a reminder, if you're listening in on the phone, if you've dialed in, if you would please mute your microphone on your phone so you can still hear us, but we don't hear you. That would be great. So, what's changed? Well, from for the last several years, in a more concentrated way over the last year and a half, we've been trying to completely rethink what the purpose, intent, and structure of the CLG program was. That includes defining a new purpose and goals for the program, restating what makes preservation in Pennsylvania at the local level effective. We're going to talk about how that the certification requirements, performance standards, and best practices have been sort of separated in our new guidelines. The evaluation process and the training requirements, changes to that program as well. That there are changes sort of sprinkled throughout the guidelines, but these are the kind of the big ones that we're gonna touch on today. So this is really a ground up overhaul of the program that we started by asking one important question, which is what makes preservation at the local level effective? What makes a good preservation program? And then how do we build how can we use the funding and the credibility and the assistance that may come along with the CLG program to support effective and holistic local preservation programs. And that means expanding our thought process to beyond just the ordinance, and thinking more about developing a program that encourages closer integration with all of the other things that municipalities do: planning, zoning, code enforcement, and other municipal functions. This is about how your community on a larger scale supports historic preservation and historic places, not just the regulation that comes along with the ordinance. So that turned into a statement of our purpose and intent of the CLG programs. So I'm not going to read all of these, every word on every slide going forward, but I think it's worth saying that what we're looking to do with this program is to establish standards and best practices, distribute guidance that supports those, engage our communities with state and federal preservation programs, provide technical and financial support that increases local capacity. That was a really big emphasis of what we're trying to do here, is to help your communities be more self-sufficient and more confident and capable in the work that you do. To facilitate networking and then provide training opportunities for your municipal leaders. In exchange, we think that effective local preservation programs in Pennsylvania, communities that have effective preservation programs, do the following things. They demonstrate that preservation is part of their overall community economic development philosophy. They have policies and laws that balance preservation with the public interest, as well as the rights of our and responsibilities of our property owners. They engage the public. They understand the resources that they are managing. They take care. Municipalities take care of the historic assets that they manage and control, and lead by example. They provide the kinds of human and financial resources that are needed to actually implement these programs effectively. And they are active partners in regional, state, and other national level programs. So that led to a differentiation in our minds between what a municipality would need to do in order to become certified, to join the program for the first time, what might be expected of them, what should be expected of those communities on an ongoing basis after they're certified, and additional ideas, policies, programs that could be implemented just as best practices. They're not required, they're not evaluated, but they are, if your community really wants to kind of step up your game and be effective, these are some other ideas that have been gathered and shared over the years. You'd see that reflected in the guidelines documents like this. This is a snapshot of a page that deals with the principle of that municipalities, CLGs, appropriately maintain historic resources that are owned by that municipality. You'll see then there's a section that says, here's what would be required for you to become a CLG. Here's what would be expected of you in an ongoing basis after that, the performance standard. And here are some best practices that could be implemented in addition to just to, again, kind of hone your approach and your skill. I'm going to pause for a second and see if there are any questions. If you have anything that has come up to your mind in what this section we've just talked about, feel free to put that into the chat box. I'm not seeing any questions come through yet, but if you have something that you want to ask about at any point during the webinar, just go ahead and type it out. Elizabeth is operators are standing by to answer those questions. Elizabeth has just pointed out that I am actually wearing a headset right now, so I guess I am the operator. All right. So no questions so far, but we'll keep going. So we're going to talk a little bit about the evaluation process. So one of the core parts of the CLG program that comes actually from the federal guidelines is that CLGs should be evaluated by the SHPO, by the state every 4 years. We've broken that out into a 2-tier process. We're calling the periodic program evaluation. That's the sort of every 4-year evaluation that is intended to assess whether you're meeting those performance standards, to help provide some feedback. It's a good opportunity, we find, to have conversations with folks that are new to the program, maybe elected officials or staff that have come on board since the community's become certified, and then to collect and organize information that might have been provided. So during a periodic evaluation, again, we've also grouped those performance standards into 2 groups. Group A are really sort of the core bread and butter things that a community needs to do in order to conduct our program legally and ethically. And then Group B standards are how does a community fitting preservation into the rest of what they do. For each of the standards that are being evaluated, a community would receive one of 3 rankings or ratings: exceeds, meets, or needs improvement. All of those findings would be summarized in a written report, and the evaluation process would include the coordinator for your region who's doing the evaluation, reviewing documents, having meetings, giving you a self-assessment document for you to answer some questions on your own about and do some self-reflection. And depending on the place and the nature of the preservation community around you, engaging with some community stakeholders to get their input. The second tier of that evaluation process is we're calling program consultation. This is a follow-up to that preliminary, to that first periodic program evaluation. And it's really what happens if during the course of that periodic evaluation, something comes to light that says you're really not meeting one of the standards, and it's something your community is going to need to fix sooner rather than later. It might be a change in your ordinance. It might be developing some tool or process that the guidelines require you to have and you don't have in place, or there's some kind of bigger issue brewing that requires some more in-depth and intensive conversation. This is the process that could lead to a recommendation that maybe it's not appropriate for your community to continue to be certified, and which is something that's covered in greater detail in the guidelines, the decertification process. So this is a part of the guidelines that we wrote hoping to never have to use. So it's just in there as a backstop, but this is what would be a follow-up to the regular evaluation process. And then the last thing in this section before we come back to some of to answer any other questions is since the beginning, the CLG program in Pennsylvania has included a requirement for staff and review board members to to participate in some training and continuing education every year. That standard was, the requirement was 8 hours per person per year. These guidelines actually lower that to 4 hours per year, we hope that will make it actually more attainable and achievable for your folks to meet. In addition, we sat and we said, what are the kinds of things, what are the sort of the core knowledge areas and the core skills that people involved in decision making around preservation in their communities, the review board members, again the staff, even elected officials, what are the core things that they need to know about in order to do their job effectively? And so we produced some guidelines for training programs that would meet that could be used to meet the training requirement in the guidelines and in the CLG guidelines, and came up with these 8 topics. These are the things that we think municipal leaders and decision makers need to understand to be good, well-rounded participants in their local program. These are very loosely and broadly defined and could be met by going to a seminar being offered by the AIA or a lecture at the local museum or the American Planning Association conference. Whatever, if there are professional development opportunities that your community leaders might be participating in anyway, these are the kinds of topics we'd be looking for them to try and seek out. The statewide conference, Historic Preservation Conference, is a good place for you to hit more than one of these topics in any given year as well. So I'll pause for a sec. We did get a question in about, do we provide a list of available educational opportunities? Yes, our office maintains we publish a monthly, it's called the Opportunities Bulletin, that includes a list of all of the conferences, seminars, lectures, grant opportunities, award opportunities. That's an email that goes out around the middle of every month. And if you are not currently receiving that email, you could send a note to Bill, Brian, or I asking to make sure that you're getting that on our mailing list. And my colleague Shelby Weaver-Splain, who manages that list, will make sure that she gets you signed up to receive that. I will say that we only publish in that newsletter the things that we are made aware of or are sort of brought to our attention. So if there's something happening in your community or in your organization that you think should be shared, please go ahead and make sure that that is sent our way as well. I'm going to talk when we get into the next section about the scholarships that we can provide to help you meet those training opportunities as well. So we have another question about whether, aside from board or commission members, who is required to attain the 4 years of training each year. That's a slippery question a little bit. We would recommend that the guidelines require that the people that are in the decision-making capacity, so those board members are the ones that really need are required to have the training. We would also strongly encourage any municipal staff who are actively involved in that process. Maybe it's even just answering questions at the permit counter before it's turned over to somebody else or the township manager to get that training, as well as we would love to see more of our elected officials, your council members or township supervisors, who are usually at the end of the chain of approving decisions by their harbor historical commission, to participate. Okay. So now we're going to talk about what you get, what we have added and retooled about the benefits. So I'm going to touch on the grant program, our design assistance, and a planning assistant, technical assistance program. So the bigger, in sort of the grand scheme of our retooling of the grant program, we intend to make 3 types of grants available to CLGs. Project grants, which are sort of the big money grants, mini grants, and scholarships. I'll give some details about each of those here. You saw the project grants and the changes to that program roll out in the 2019 round that just closed and were reviewed about earlier this month. These are for projects that have for up to the grant award up to $25,000. So we upped the maximum from 18 to 25. We substantially lowered the match requirements and from it was 50% or dollar for dollar down to 10%, 25%, or 50% based on what type of project you're doing. The lower the match requirement, the 10% match, that's really for doing the kinds of things that you need to remain a CLG. Design guidelines, survey, planning, the kind of bread and butter things that are sometimes difficult to find grant dollars for. We want to make this money available for you to maintain those, to do those kinds of projects. That middle tier, the 25%, those are things like National Register nominations or public education programs, sort of the other things that maybe are a little outside of the core functional documents or tools that you need to do your program well. The 50% is really only applicable for a shared services circuit rider program that we're trying to develop, but most of our grants are going to have a 10 or 25% match. And you can look at the 2019 guidelines that are still available on our website if you want to get a sense of what this looks like. We changed the application deadline. It used to be midwinter. We rolled it back to fall. And that was really so that we could try and get you an earlier start date and a longer grant period. Historically, we had been providing, we'd only been able to have these grants run for about 12 months, and they were starting in August and going till July. We wanted to give you as much time as you could you needed to do this project as we could. And that meant rolling all of the deadlines and start dates back even further. We're still trying to refine that process and work within our kind of bureaucratic processes to give you as much time as possible. But for now, and we think we're getting there. And our target is about 18 months. The next phase of the grant retool that we're going to try and roll out is a mini grant program, which is to provide smaller dollar amounts to support small but impactful projects, but in a timely and sort of rolling basis. I know that I get phone calls the day after the grant deadline saying, "Do you have any money to do X?" And unfortunately, at that point, if you didn't apply, the answer is probably not. So what we want to try and do is make some of our CLG grant money available every year on a periodic basis throughout the course of a year. Maybe you needed to do a feasibility study or an ordinance amendment or a quick planning study. But these would be projects of grants that were generally less than $5,000. So stay tuned for that. We're hoping to roll that out in the next round. For the last several years, we have offered scholarships to either send folks to conferences or seminars, or to pay to have speakers come to your communities. And we've had some good use of that uses of that money, but not as much as we would have liked. So we're trying to rethink how that program works and how much money is needed, and how to distribute that. And so we're going to bring that program back. But the idea is, if we ask you to go through training every year, we should make some resources available for you to do that. This past year, we sent one of the hard members from one of our CLGs to the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions conference. We would have loved to send more. That was the only taker. But this is money for registration, travel, lodging, to any conference in the state or nationally, for that matter. The next NAPC conference is going to be in 2020 in Tacoma. So if you've ever wanted to go to the West Coast, this might be your chance. Other technical assistance offerings that we're adding. These are things that didn't really exist in a formal way before. One is that we're calling Designing for Preservation Solutions. So this is a design-oriented program that would include pro bono technical assistance from our staff, including the architect who works in our office. Would be available to partner organizations in the municipality, not just the municipality itself. So your Main Street or your library or the Girl Scouts or whoever, anybody who has a property that they need some design assistance with, our project. And this could include something like a code analysis. What would we need to do to, how heavy a lift would it be to bring this building into code compliance, or what are the opportunities, the reuse opportunities, or what would happen if we rehabilitated the facade of this building, or where would we put a ramp? We can provide some graphics, some written materials based on what you might need. I'm going to share here, when we're pause for a second, some documents. Actually, you should have received those in the emails, but that has all of the parameters and sort of how to go about requesting this assistance. The companion to that is the what we're calling GPS, which is our planning program. And this is for projects that the SHPO, the state, would not normally be involved in. So things that aren't tax credits or Section 106 or grant related, but maybe it's a subdivision that your municipality is working on, and there's some archaeological concerns or some old buildings, or maybe the township just bought or the borough just bought a building, and you don't really know what to do with it, and you don't want to mess it up. So this is a process for you to ask for our help for things that we wouldn't normally be involved with in a formal way. Again, that that document was attached to the emails, so you can find out all of the things that are available and how to request that. Any questions about the benefits, the grant programs or our technical assistance? I'm not seeing any so far, so we might have one coming. I'll say while we're waiting, this is an evolutionary process as well. So if there are types of assistance or benefits that you think would be valuable to your community that aren't reflected here, share that with Bill, Brian, or I, because we're looking to make this as robust as many incentives and benefits as we can. We just don't necessarily always know exactly what the communities need or what would be helpful. And we're going to be evaluating these technical assistance programs after we get a few projects under our belts to see if they're actually doing what you need them to do. And so this is their change. Okay, so we do have a question that came in and said, what are some little things or small projects that the average citizen could benefit? Suggestions for smaller scale initiatives we could apply for. I'm gonna, let me think about that for just 1 second. So Gettysburg, is this the kinds of things that you as the borough could do for your citizens, or things that you would be looking for our office to make available to the average citizen? I'm going to keep moving with the webinar. We have some time reserved at the end. Okay, here we go. Gettysburg says, yeah, as a HARB, we'd like to offer more public training or resources for folks who can't afford it. So some ideas I think that we have helped support in the past in Bellefonte, I believe we have used CLG funding to support the Old House Fair, which is a resource fair and educational weekend targeted towards property owners. Includes technical demonstrations and speakers about how to maintain historic houses. In a previous job in a different state, I worked with a CLG to use grant money to host masonry preservation workshops and hands-on for property owners. So I think there are the grant money in particular is useful, could be used to provide those types of seminars, training opportunities, and assistance to your property owners. And I would encourage you to talk to Brian about how to put that something like that together. The last part of this, and then we'll stop for any kind of general questions, is the renewal process. Our director has referred to this as the renewing of the vows. As you saw, many of our CLGs joined the program more than 10 years ago. So in some instances, the folks who were driving that process are no longer there. And so we think this is a good opportunity to refresh a community's commitment to becoming to best practices and being having a good preservation program. So and our Park Service requirements require all CLGs to complete new certification agreements. So, but that doesn't mean that existing CLGs, of which all of you are, would have to meet the new certification requirements to remain. This is sort of a pass. And what we would be looking for is for you, the communities who do sign, kind of re-up their participation and sign new agreements, would have up to 4 years or until their next program evaluation to implement the policies and tools that they don't have currently in order to meet those standards. We've circulated with this email, the self-assessment workbook that outlines what all of those performance standards are in a yes or no checklist format. So you could figure out hopefully pretty easily what you do and don't have. And then on the back of that workbook was a place where you could summarize all the things that you checked as needing to do and prioritize them so that you could make that your part of your grant wish list for the next round. Yes, the self-assessment workbook was circulated with the first email announcement about this, and maybe the reminder. But if not, Brian is sitting next to me, and he's going to send it to the folks in Gettysburg, so make sure that you have it. And anybody else who didn't get it, contact Bill, Brian, or I to get your hands on that. So timing-wise, what'll happen is the new certification agreements, which we're finalizing with our lawyers and the National Park Service, will be sent out in February of 2019. We picked that date because we know that there was just an election, so starting in January, some new folks will be seated on your boards of supervisors and city and borough councils, and then they'll have to elect their chairman and so on. So we wanted to give some time for the dust to settle. And when they get that packet with this new agreement in it, it'll include a sample resolution that if for your council or board to vote on to authorize signing the agreement, if that's necessary. That's based on your local laws and your local rules about whether that resolution would be required, but we wanted to give you that tool if you need it. We'd want the signed certification agreements to be returned to our office within 90 days. And then we will put them through the state signature process, send you back a fully executed copy, along with one going to the National Park Service. And then those are, once those are signed, they just remain in effect in perpetuity until either you break up with us or we break up with you. But there is a process, or there is a process, and there's a process for notifying and going through the decertification. It's not just something that happens overnight. That's kind of detailed in the guidelines. So what happens if your community doesn't sign and return the agreement? Well, CLGs that don't return the agreements will, after an extended period of time, be decertified. We will just say, we will take it as a sign that you're just not that into us, and we're going to part ways, and we will initiate the decertification process. But if you think that your community does want to renew, or you really want them to renew and you just need a little more time to do some education and some convincing, make sure that you contact Bill, Brian, or I and update us on that status, and so we can give you an extension and not initiate that. And if your community just decides that this isn't something that seems to be the right fit for them any longer, the best way to go about that is to have your chief elected official, your mayor, your supervisor, your chairman, your council president, to send us a letter saying we'd like to just be decertified, that we can make that happen. But again, if we don't hear from you, if we don't get that signed agreement back, we may just eventually assume that you don't want to participate any longer. So we had a question about whether we need to send in the self-assessment. No, that's for you to use and keep. It's just a simple way for you to say, well, I don't know how we meet or wouldn't meet the guidelines, and we wanted to give you that tool to help easily answer that question and figure out how far you kind of have to go. We actually did a little internal research before we settled on a lot of these guidelines and changes, and overwhelmingly found that most of your communities are really not that far away. Little tweaks here and there, and the big lift may be on developing things like guidelines, but that's why we wanted to make the grant funds so much more accessible to you as well. The last two parts of this, the last two slides I have here are just a couple of commercials. So we have just recently adopted the new state historic preservation plan that's in effect until 2023, and it's titled #Preservation Happens Here. So this is a document that seeks to identify big trends, issues, and opportunities for historic communities and resources throughout the state, and includes an action agenda with some things that your communities can do to help promote make preservation more part of your daily lives. And the hashtag is intentional and useful because it is what we will use to source nominees for awards that we give out every year, projects and communities that we may profile in our publications, and other ways that we just might promote the good work that's happening at all levels and parts in all parts of the state. So what we'd encourage you to do is, if your municipality, organizations within your community are doing preservation work, post it on social media using the hashtag preservation happens here, and we'll be able to follow that and gather all of this information for our future publications. So that's the end of the slides, but we do have one more question that came in. It says, does the SHPO have a one-pager with bullets for advocating remaining in the CLG program to provide to any elected officials who may consider decertifying? That is under development, should be available in the next week or two. We're doing some overhauls to the CLG portion of our website, and the one-pagers would be that summarize the CLG program will be made available there. I just had some unforeseen events happen in and around our office the last week. I kind of shuffled that off the desk for temporarily, but we will come back to that next week. And we'll also make sure that that is sent out to our email contacts. One of the things that's going to be requested during this certification, the renewal process, is the identification of a staff level point of contact. Many of you are municipal staff, some of you are not, but we want to make sure that there aren't any lapses in communication because somebody's term on the HARB expired and nobody was that we didn't get that information. So we're going to be asking for a staff liaison point of contact to be communicated to us every year so that we can make sure that all of these types of documents and other notices are distributed to a consistent person every time. So those are the big changes in a nutshell. As I said, there are other changes that have been reflected throughout the guidelines and procedures. There will be changes to other things like your annual report forms in the future, but those are sort of under development. For 2019, or for the 2018 annual report, which will be due in March of 2019, we're going to keep the same format as you've always been reporting on. So we won't change that for this past year. So you won't have to worry about kind of adapting to that. Other changes to look forward to is I will expect that the next CLG grant round will actually be a completely online application process. Our office is transitioning to a completely online system, not the fillable Word document that some of you are used to, but actual log onto this website and upload your application there. That is, if any of you have applied for Keystone grants in the last round, it's that same system. that will be another big thing that is changing. Are there any last questions? Got one more coming in. No? Okay. Well, you've all received these slides as a PDF. I am recording this webinar. It will be posted to our YouTube channel probably next week sometime. And you know where you can find Bill, Brian, or I, hopefully, if you have anything that you want to talk about that might be specific to your community. I want to thank you all for taking your time here on a Friday afternoon in December to sit in on this. And if there's any way that we can be supportive of your efforts to renew and improve your programs, please share. I'm gonna go ahead and we're gonna log off here in just a second. It looks like we might have one question coming in from Mary, and give that just another second. Again, if you have any contacts with people in other communities who are not currently CLGs and that are interested, we will be offering some educational opportunities like this early next year to talk about how to become a CLG if you're not already participating. All right, folks. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon and have a nice weekend.